Thank you, Joyce. Well, this is a special Sunday for many reasons, as I mentioned earlier. It's All Saints' Day in the Christian calendar and Halloween in the secular calendar. But I say secular with some reservation. Everywhere you look today, you will find ghosts and skeletons that have come back from the dead on people's lawns. If the key to being spiritual is the presence of spirits, then this is a very spirit-filled holiday. There are spirits everywhere. And it's a holiday celebrated by people of all faiths. Now, one could reasonably object that there are very few people tonight who expect their houses to be haunted, to go to sleep on Halloween night and hear things that go bump in the night or anything scary like that. Fair enough. We are very much like the Sadducees in the gospel reading today, who don't believe in the general resurrection. So they make up a story about a woman who has passed from brother to brother to brother to brother, so that they can make fun of Jesus' idea of the general resurrection. They're skeptics about the afterlife, like most of us are now skeptics about ghosts. But it wasn't always this way. Historians tell us that the ancient Celts, back in England and in Ireland, they believed that on New Year's Eve, the spirits of all the people who died that year would come back to the houses where they had lived and come in a spooky way. And the living did not want to be there when they arrived. The living wanted to get out of the way so that if their house was to be haunted for an evening, they wouldn't feel the effects. So they would leave out bowls of soup and plates of food as offerings to the returning spirits. And the living, meanwhile, would put together lanterns made of turnips. So they'd have a light in a turnip lantern, and they would go off and sit around bonfires for the evening and keep each other company while things were kind of scary. The Celtic New Year was on November 1st, so this is considered one of the origins of what we now call Halloween. Now, today, of course, we don't believe in ghosts visiting our houses and apartments at night. Among the children, Halloween seems to have lost most of its association with fear. Most of the kids think that this is just a costume party. It's got nothing to do with being scary. So tonight they'll arrive as cartoon characters and heroes from video games, and some of them might show up as vampires and Frankensteins, but most of them won't. That doesn't really resonate with them. They just want to show up dressed as the heroes that they believe in. It's a chance to just be somebody else for the night, and to score a lot of candy, of course. They are not at all like the ghosts of old who used to come to houses on Halloween night to haunt and terrify the people who they used to live with. No, if we had to look for the people who are interested in being scared, it's the adults. I've been riding through the neighborhood to get to church, of course, for the last couple of weeks, and I've seen all the lawns here. And you cannot imagine a more macabre neighborhood than this one. It's amazing how many skeletons there are in this neighborhood. And they're scary skeletons. Some of them are holding axes and knives, and they're covered in blood. This neighborhood believes in the macabre, and it's true. Come on in. And it's true all over the city. I traveled a lot to get here, and trust me, there are scary skeletons and ghosts all over this city right now. It's interesting because this panoply of skeletons doesn't actually reflect what the kids are scared of. If we really thought through what the kids should be terrified of, the lawns would be filled with images of wildfires and flooding, the kinds of things which they're going to be talking about at COP26 in Glasgow starting today. It seems very appropriate that that conference is happening and starting on Halloween, because there's nothing scarier in the world than what they're going to be talking about. But judging by the lawns around the city, that's not what scares the older generation. And perhaps that's the key to why we have this problem. That's a subject for another sermon. Instead, the adults have filled their lawns with a more personal kind of fear. All over the city, lawns are adorned with skeletons that reach out for the living, and with ghosts that seem eager to assault anyone who comes by. The fears of yesteryear, the witches and monsters, don't play as big a role as they used to. Mostly, judging by what I've seen in this neighborhood and others, what scares adults is death. Skeletons and ghosts, the bigger the better. Bony hands and skulls are what are creepy right now, and we expect children to share that fear. It may seem obvious to us that skeletons and skulls are the definition of creepy and what's scary, but it wasn't always that way. Back in the Middle Ages, people had a different attitude towards bones, and Halloween comes out of the Middle Ages, so to understand Halloween, it helps to understand how they saw that stuff. Back then, they would bury a body in a fairly shallow grave. And so when it rained and there were storms, over the years, it was not unusual to see bones poking out of the ground. If you remember your Shakespeare in Hamlet, Hamlet and Horatio are walking through a graveyard, and they come across a gravedigger who's emptying a grave so that a fresh body can be put inside. And he's pulling out the bones of the court jester who used to live there. And Hamlet just gamely goes, "Oh, I knew him," and picks up his skull and gives his famous "Alas, poor Yorick" speech. Imagine walking through Mount Pleasant Cemetery and seeing the bones of one of your former co-workers. "Hey, there's Bob!" and picking up the skull and starting to talk to the skull. We would not do that. We are creeped out by bones and skulls in a way that they weren't back in Hamlet's day. And that was in the 1500s, right? 1500s, early 1600s. So a lot has changed. Our image of what is scary, the bones and the skeletons, that's something that's on us. That's a modern thing. We find that creepy. And it's ironic because there has never been an age in the history of the entire human species when we have been more effective at preventing death. We may be scared of death, but we're really good at pushing it off. And yet, our culture is obsessed with death. If you turn on the TV on any given night, it's CSI Miami, CSI Las Vegas, CSI everything, right? Law and Order, everything, murder, 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 murder. We are obsessed with wrongful death. And at the movies, violent death is everywhere, usually villainous minions being the chief victims of our superheroes who manage to rain down murderous justice. And in the past 40 years, zombie movies have become a mainstay in horror films. There's even comedy zombie movies now, like the new Bill Murray film, The Dead Don't Stay Dead. It's like our secular society does not believe in the afterlife. A peaceful heaven that lasts for eternity is treated as more of a joke in pop culture than a reality. What we do like to imagine are scenarios where we die, then we're instantly reanimated as mindless zombies hungry for brains. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of those films now. This is what fascinates us about death. Like the Sadducees, we've rejected the official version of resurrection, but we can't stop talking about it. We're actually obsessed with resurrection now. In video games, the kids play games where you're constantly coming back from the dead over and over and over again. Your kids understand resurrection probably better than most Christians do. They do it almost every day. And when we go to the movies, zombies are resurrected versions of ourselves. Deep down, we fear that there's no afterlife, but instead, that what happens next will be just like being alive, but much, much worse. Many filmmakers in their zombie movies have suggested that a zombie is just a mindless consumer, eating and destroying with no concern for the consequences. They're a parody of modern life, the undead version of the modern shopper, our worst instincts amplified. They reflect a fear that the world will take its revenge on us for our endless consumerism, and we will end up being the ones that are consumed. In our reading today, Jesus tells the Sadducees that they've got it all wrong. They've misunderstood resurrection. The afterlife is not like life just repeated, but it's qualitatively different. It's not just more time, it's a different kind of time and a different kind of life. People don't get married or divorced. They're free of those obligations. Women are no longer being handed from brother to brother to brother. That all ends, Jesus says, and he knows that the women in his audience will see that as a great relief. Jesus tells them that God is not the God of the corruptible dead, of the rotting flesh, but of the living. That living in God's way is why there's an afterlife at all. To live in God's way is life, and this is what provides eternal life. Moses and Jacob, Jesus says, are not dead at all, but alive and well with God. The Sadducees' skepticism and hard-heartedness has blinded them to the life force of God's way, which is present in this life and will continue into the next. We tend to think of Halloween as a secular holiday, and that's partially correct. But what we forget is also how Christian a holiday Halloween is. And this takes a little explaining. In the first 1,000 years of Christianity, there were lots of people who died for the faith, martyrs. And there were people who were so filled with God's Spirit that they were able to do things which amazed the people around them, and they were credited with working miracles. These people became known as saints after they died. You need to do a miracle to become a saint in the Catholic Church. Over time, the martyrs and the saints were given days, feast days. But by the year 800 or so, there were so many saints and martyrs that they couldn't all fit into the calendar anymore. So around the year, in the year 837, the Pope at the time declared that, okay, I know what we'll do. We will declare November 1st to be All Saints' Day. So the saints who didn't get their own day, we won't forget them. They'll be part of All Saints' Day. I guess even popes don't want to hurt the feelings of saints. Nice. So All Saints' Day became November 1st. Now, those saints were being honored. An old word for honored is to hallow, or to recognize the sacredness of something. So, it became the day before All Saints' Day became known as All Hallows' Eve. And that, over the years, got shortened into Halloween. So the word Halloween is a very Christian word. We're not hallowing the skeletons. We're not hallowing the scary ghosts. We're hallowing those who are sacred. Now, Christians have been promised that a loving, ethical life will be rewarded with a good afterlife. So when people started to celebrate All Hallows, a new ritual appeared. It's a twist on the pagan one. Catholics are very good at taking what the pagans are doing and giving it a twist. And what they did was that this happened in medieval society, people would start on Hallows' Eve, they would dress up as the dead saints to honor them. So people would dress up as, name a saint before the year 837, and they would dress up as those saints. And at the same time, it became common for the poorer people in the villages to go door to door asking for something called soul cakes, a treat. And in exchange, they would pray for the people who had died in the year or so before in that household. So the idea of going from door to door asking for a treat was actually a Christian idea. The idea of scary ghosts coming to the house was the pagan idea, but the Christians introduced the idea of going door to door to ask for a treat so you could help somebody. Many key parts of the Halloween ritual, including the costumes and handing out of treats, were invented by Christians. Not to scare people, though, but to reassure them. Death is not the end. It is possible to live a good life and to be granted eternal life. That is the promise of the Christian faith. Halloween was invented as a message of hope. Hope for the living and hope for the dead. Now, over the centuries, Halloween evolved. When the holiday was brought to North America, those turnip lanterns were replaced by pumpkins, who became jack-o'-lanterns. Society slowly became more secular, so the saints' costumes were replaced by scarier costumes. And now the kids have gotten rid of most of the scarier costumes, and they just dress up as their secular saints, their secular heroes, the cartoon figures and the video game figures that they respect. But the anxiety at the bottom of it, what happens when we die, remains, at least in the hearts of the adults who buy the candy and decorate the lawns with evil-looking skeletons. Jesus told the Sadducees that God is the God of the living, not of the corrupted bodies of the dead. In a sense, God doesn't actually believe in death, not in the sense of annihilation. And that's something that churches need to keep in mind too. We often think of churches as an institution which are kind of basically doomed. Too few people are coming, churches close every day and become condos. But our goal is not to be church in any particular formulation. Our goal is to be a community that follows God's ways, God's living ways. As time changes, so does church, because the church is the means, not the goal. We're not Christians because we love church. We're Christians because we love God. Few of us would ever have imagined that we'd end up going to church on computers. That was just unthinkable 3 years ago. You'd say, hey, why don't you go to church? Turn on your computer. They said, what are you talking about? I got to go there. That's how it works. But now, I'm not sure how many people we have online today. How many people do we have online today, Judy? So we have 77 logins, which translates into probably 85 to 90 people because of couples. And we've got about 15 or 20 people in here. So, 100 people in a mix of computer and in person. It's bizarre, but it's still church. We can feel that it's still church because we're still congregating together to be in relationship with the God of the living. Today, one of our new members who you're meeting in these videos lives hundreds of kilometers away from here, and yet she feels like she can be a member of this church, and she's right. Some of our members have never been in our building, and that's okay too. Church is about a relationship with God that brings us together in community, and that's what makes all of this possible, in whatever form is needed. So in a few minutes, we're going to welcome some new people to the Lawrence Park family. And since we're doing it on Halloween, Paul and the soloists are about to sing a song to us, which is taken from the Addams Family Broadway musical. And it's all about feeling together, the living and the dead.